Hi everyone, welcome to the NVMe Virtual Plugfest number 14 webinar. Today's date is September 29th for those of you who aren't aware, but for those of you who are, you're on the call right now to talk about the Virtual Plugfest number 14. The Plugfest itself will be held the week of November 9th through the 12th, so that's just a few short weeks away. And this presentation will be given by myself, Tim Sheehan, manager of the data center group here at the IOL, as well as Dave Wolf, CTO and director of the data center group here at the IOL. So just to give a little background about the UNH-IOL, the University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Lab has been around for over 30 years now. We are a non-profit, neutral, third-party data communications test facility located in Durham, New Hampshire. Our workforce is made up of 20 to 25 full-time staff members such as myself and David, and over 100 undergrad and graduate students, all made up from the University of New Hampshire, as well as other surrounding colleges and universities in the area. We've been associated with NVMe.org and their Integrators List test program since 2012, and this has been a great program for both groups, the IOL as well as NVMe.org. So again, this Plugfest will be virtual, similar to Plugfest 13 that happened back in June of 2020. We cut our teeth on that one and it worked out pretty well. We've learned some lessons and things that we're gonna do. What we're gonna do with this Plugfest 14 is have both the PCI and the Fabrics Plugfest happening on the same week in parallel. We've got two different groups that'll be working on it, the NVMe-OF group here in the lab, as well as the NVMe team. And both of them will be working on their respective products. We're going to follow the version 14 test plan for both conformance and interoperability, and you can see those test plans out on the IOL website. And we'll be performing the testing here in the lab with the staff as well as students. Right now, students are allowed in the lab as well as they're on campus, and as long as everything continues to go well, we'll have everybody involved. This, again, will be a remote and virtual Plugfest, so there will be no customers allowed. And of course, the real main purpose of this particular event is to register your products, your customer products, on the NVMe Integrators list for both PCI, MI, as well as the 4 fabrics, topologies and technologies that are available. So, little agenda for today. I'll start off by talking about the Integrators list and just some information there. Dave will pick it up and go over some of the test plan 14 highlights. And then I'll come back online and discuss some more information about the Interact tool, shipping and logistics of the event, and then we'll finish it up with some summary and some Q&A at the end. Again, just more logistics about of the event and what virtual means and what you'll need to do in order to be prepared for this event. So let's talk about the Integrators list. So as of the 15th, as you can see, these are the number of products that we currently have on the Integrators list. The NVMe Integrators list is made up of PCI devices as well as MI devices. And then the OF Integrators list, which is obviously over fabrics, deals with Rocky, TCP, and also fiber channel, fabric products that are actually on this list. So that gives you an idea of where we're at today. And what kind of products do we actually test to get on these lists? Well, the NVMe Integrators list, like I said, is for PCI as well as MI. And we're going to test out PCI drives, host platforms, and switches. And for fabrics, you're going to be able to test out Rocky, TCP, fiber channel, and the new iWarp. Okay, iWarp is an addition for this Plugfest. We've been testing it out as a proof of concept over the last couple of Plugfests, and it's gone well. But those are the 4 different technologies that we're dealing with. And of course, for each of those 4, for the Fabrics Integrators list, you can test out initiators, targets, and switches. And I'll go over those, and what it takes to actually get each of those onto the Integrators list. And so, the requirements. So if you are a PCI device, then what you're going to need to be able to do is pass all of the mandatory conformance tests for the PC Edition software, as well as all the mandatory tests for that are in the LaCroix edition of the actual Interact test tools. And this is both version 14 for this particular Plugfest. Then moving on to interoperability testing, you'd need to be able to pass the I/O tests on 5 of the 6 NVMe host platforms that we have, and also some of the boot tests. And if you are a U.2 form factor, you'll need to be able to handle and pass the hot plug test that we have there. That would get you all the testing for a PCI device. If you're doing MI, then you'd need to be able to pass the conformance testing that is available through the Teledyne LaCroix tool that we have, and that's for MI. Now, if you are a host platform or a PCI switch, then what you're going to need to do is be able to pass 5 combinations of SSDs on your products in order to, and this is all just through Interop testing, in order to pass that and to actually get onto the integrators list. So that just went over PCI and MI integrators list testing. If we move on to fabrics, you can see that up at the top for initiators, hosts, and switches, really all you have to do for initiators, hosts, and switches is perform interop testing with at least 2 unique NVMe-OF subsystems or targets. They can be unique in the sense that they, if you look down at the bottom, can have the same hardware, but maybe different drivers or OS, and those are considered unique. So really, initiators, hosts, and switches just need to pass interop tests with at least 2 NVMe-OF subsystems and interop partners. Now, if you are a target or an NVMe-OF subsystem, then what you're going to need to do is pass interop testing with 2 NVMe-OF host partners or initiators. And you'd also need to pass all of the mandatory NVMe base protocol conformance tests, version 14, as well as you'd have to be able to test all of the NVMe-OF conformance tests that are mandatory in the PC edition. So those are 2 different conformance test suites that we have, right? NVMe protocol conformance, which is the base one, the base spec, as well as the NVMe-OF protocol conformance. So that gives you an idea of what we need to do, or what you would need to do, and your products would need to do in order to pass to get onto the integrators list if you are an initiator, host, or a target, or a switch. And then, of course, once you get onto the integrators list, or you pass all the testing in order to get onto it, we're going to need to get some information from you about your product. And this would allow us to actually put all that information onto our website, which is hosted on the IOL web pages. And you would also get reports that would have listing out what tests you pass and that you made it onto the integrators list. And all of this information that you see here will be put onto both the website and the reports that we have. So with that, we're going to do a little bit of discussion about Test Plan 14 updates, and I'm going to pass over control to Dave Wolf, CTO of the IOL. Dave?
All right, thanks, Tim. All right, so we're going to talk about the updates for Test Plan 14. And to introduce that, I'll just first talk about some of the process with doing these updates. We do this about twice a year, and we do that to keep pace with updates to the NVMe and NVMe-OF specifications. And all of these updates, the new tests, the procedures, the tests that go from FYI to mandatory, all of that's reviewed by the NVMe Interop and Compliance Committee, and then it actually goes through a vote and approval with the NVMe technical work group as well. So there is a process that goes through that. Everything gets checked and reviewed. It's not just Tim and I over here at UNH coming up with the stuff, but we do review it with the community and make sure that there's consensus and support for those changes, and that they're addressing things that are useful, and of course match what's actually been done in the specification. So first, I'm just going to address big picture what the updates were for test plan number 14, and then I'll dig into some of the details. And with respect to those details, we only have time to go so far with them today. Of course, if you really want to see the nitty gritty and what we did with each procedure, you can look in the test plan itself, but I'll try and provide an appropriate level of detail today. So first, as a summary, at the top, Tim mentioned this before, the integrators list now accepts iWork products. The tests for those are the same as for other NVMe-OF products. There's a set of NVMe conformance tests. There's a set of NVMe-OF conformance tests. There's nothing unique to iWarp. The tests themselves and the way we run them are agnostic to the underlying transport. But like Tim said, we wanted to do a proof of concept to make sure that the tools and the tests all executed as we would expect when using a different transport, and they've done that. So the integrators list accepts the iWarp products now. Second interesting thing is we added support for EDSFF for the hot plug of PCIe-based SSDs. So in the past, we didn't need to do hot plug, obviously, for add-in cards and M.2, it just plain didn't apply. We did do hot plug if we were testing something in the U.2 form factor. Now we're also introducing hot plug for EDSFF form factor, so E1.S, E1.L, right? So if a drive comes through that, we'll be doing hot plug testing on that. Next update with respect to NVMe-MI conformance, there's quite a bit of updates and additions to new tests in NVMe-MI. Big picture there, we're aligning it to NVMe-MI version 1.1 specification. So on the following slides, I'll get into a little more detail of what that looks like. Similar with NVMe-OF, we've several TPs and ECNs we're addressing there, adding tests, updating tests. Main thrust of things there is we're aligning to NVMe-OF version 1.1. With respect to NVMe, the NVMe base specification, we've already made updates in the previous Plugfest and Plugfest 13 to align with NVMe version 1.4. But in the meantime, there's been some ECNs against NVMe 1.4, as well as a few TPs. And so we're just kind of addressing those new additions to NVMe version 1.4. And of course, a bunch of tests moving from FYI to mandatory, 42 on the PCIe side and 26 for Fabrics devices. I'm not going to go through each of the tests that changed status from FYI to mandatory today. You can check that in the test plan itself. That's also reflected, Tim's going to talk a little bit about the tools later on, but the notation of those tests that changed from FYI to mandatory, that's flagged in version 14 of our test tool, so you can see it there as well. I will speak a little bit to the process for a test moving from FYI to mandatory. All of the new tests, every time we make a new test, add in the new test procedure or testing new feature, when we introduce those tests to the program, they're FYI. That is the default starting state for any test. And we don't make it a mandatory test until we've run it at a Plugfest and we're seeing, one, that our test is stable and executes properly, and two, there's a reasonable number of devices out there that are implementing that feature, and the test is executing properly on those devices. So those are kind of the two things that we look at. So coming out of Plugfest 13, we did a review of all of our FYI tests. We did that with the NVMe Interop and Compliance Committee, and where we saw stability, both in the test itself and in the products that were available, for those ones that we saw as stable, we made those mandatory, just to speak to our process a little bit there. All right, so let's dig in a little bit deeper into what happened with NVMe-MI. We've had the NVMe-MI test for a few years now. It was based on the 1.0 spec, and we were really kind of waiting for the NVMe-MI 1.1 specs to come out for us to address some of these ECNs with respect to the 1.0 and 1.0A specification. There was really only one relatively minor update to our NVMe-MI test probably over the previous year and a half, and that was for a particular test that could cause interoperability problems. So we've had a lot of catch up to do on the NVMe-MI front to align to the 1.1 spec. So some of those things, there was ECNs against the 1.0 spec about the replay and the SOM fields, how a device can filter controller health status poll responses, how to use the namespace metadata feature, how to use set features request for the controller metadata feature, and some things around the product info area field. These are all things that fall under ECNs, so corrections and clarifications. So some of them were new test cases, some of them were modifications to existing test cases. Other things that we updated in the NVMe-MI test plan, there was a bunch of TPs. Now, if you're familiar with NVMe's process for creating the specification, TP means technical proposal. That is when new features are added to the specification. So we had a TP that addressed the management endpoint buffer read-write command, and also scheduling closure services send-receive commands, command-initiated auto pause, topology multi-record, PCIe port numbering. Those were all new features, and you can think of them too as some of the key differences between NVMe-MI 1.0 and NVMe-MI 1.1. Other key differences, VPD read-write. There was some clarifications for how admin commands, NVMe admin commands are used over MI, right? So over the SM bus link as opposed to over the PCIe link. So we added some tests to check out some common NVMe admin commands, identify, get log, and get feature. So those are pretty fundamental commands for NVMe operation. So we're adding some checks for those over NVMe-MI. Depending on the device type, whether it's a storage device or an NVMe enclosure, certain admin commands are allowed or not allowed. So we added some test cases to say, if this is an NVMe enclosure, these certain commands are prohibited. Let's make sure that those prohibited commands get handled properly. And then also, we added some tests around NVMe-MI commands during the sanitize operation. So, when a sanitize is happening on a drive, in the NVMe spec, they had done a lot of work to clarify what commands could happen, what commands would be aborted, what commands would be ignored, and things like that when a sanitize is going on. They had to clarify some of those same things with respect to NVMe-MI. If an NVMe-MI command arrives while a sanitize operation is happening, what's the device supposed to do? So there was some clarification there. So those are the kind of at a high level the changes that were done in the NVMe-MI specification. Again, if you want to see the exact tests that were added, the exact procedures that were added, you can check out the test plan itself. We try to be pretty comprehensive in the modification record that we put at the front of the test plan. So all of the changes are recorded there, and you can find them there. But this is just at a high level what changed in NVMe-MI. Similar story on the NVMe over Fabrics front. We added some test cases to address ECNs, or error clarifications that were made against the NVMe-OF 1.0 spec. For example, once a controller is enabled, that it should support or should accept admin commands. Making sure the host and controller association is preserved for 2 minutes. That's an interesting one to make life a little bit easier, especially as maybe there's congestion on a network or network problems. We don't want just a simple network disruption to cause a host and controller association to be thrown out. So that's a feature there that helps preserve that. How to accept commands on channels that aren't yet authenticated. So there's some new clarifications in there. In the case where a Fabrics command is not supported on an I/O queue, shows up in an I/O queue, what's a Fabrics device supposed to do? So we added some test cases for that. Lots of new requirements around the controller ID of FFFF. So, and NVMe base spec actually kind of dealt with this probably a year, 2 years ago as well, that, there was some IDs that were handled as special cases. And then in some cases, it wasn't fully clarified what to do with if an all-F's namespace ID was handled. Similar thing here with Fabrics, just kind of tightening up the requirements around what to do with commands that have controller IDs of all F's and making sure that that's really clear. So we built some test cases around that. Also, there's new features added to the NVMe-OF specification. So 3 big technical proposals that we looked at there. One is how to handle connection loss. Others around the disconnect command, how to handle that. Keep alive support in the case where a persistent connection is expected. Error conditions around persistent connections, and then some tests around flow control and flow control negotiation. So again, just some new features added to the NVMe-OF test plan. With NVMe, this is the base spec. This is a much larger specification. There's a lot more tests with respect to NVMe. You saw that on the previous slide, that there was 42 tests that went from FYI to mandatory. This is where we usually see the most changes, right? Because this is where most of the attention is directed. So some of the new things that were added in the case of the NVMe base spec tests, we added some tests around the thin P bit. We added tests around telemetry host initiated data generation number, how that increments. So that was a part of a technical proposal that was against the base specification. There was clarification in the specification about the data unit's written value and when that should be incremented and when it should not be incremented. And so the specification clarifies that if a write uncorrectable command occurs or a write 0 command occurs, that should have no impact on the data unit's written value. So we added some test cases for that. We added some test cases around if device self-test operation is going on and then a format command comes down the pipe, what are you supposed to do with that? How is it properly terminated? Added some test cases there. Sanitize config, so new test cases around that. And then also how to, if a block is deallocated, when to mark it as allocated. So when that's a write uncorrectable or a write 0 command occurs. So basically we have some tests where we do a deallocation and then do one of these 3 commands and make sure that it gets marked as allocated properly. And then some tests around endurance group enhancements and read recovery levels. And those were both with respect to some new technical proposals against the base specification. So again, in summary, the big changes for test plan number 14 here, for Plugfest 14, align our test to NVMe-MI 1.1, align our test to NVMe-OF 1.1, and then with respect to NVMe, addressing a couple of the ECNs and TPs that have already been ratified with respect to the 1.4 specification. So those are the big changes. Again, we try to do a really good job with the modification record and the test plan and make that as comprehensive as we can. So if there's specific features that you're interested in or specific tests you're curious about, we've made sure to record those in the modification record of the test plan. You can dig in there for more detail. So that's what we've done with the test plan updates. So now I'm going to hand it back to Tim. He's going to talk about the test tools, using those, how to get them, and so forth. So I'll hand it back to you, Tim.
Great. Thanks, Dave. So now that was good information. I just want to let everybody know there is a Q&A section or a chat section if you'd like to put in any questions you have. Love to answer those for you at the end during our Q&A section. But let's talk a little bit about the IOL Interact now. So how do you get it? Pretty much what you need to be is a member of one of our test groups, the NVMe or the NVMe-OF test groups. As part of a member, you'll get a year-long membership to perform testing in each one of these 2 areas, as well as you'd get a copy of our Interact software, as well as our Teledyne LaCroix scripts to run on your Teledyne LaCroix equipment. So how are you going to do that? In order to get our PC edition, you're going to fill out a licensing agreement first. Then we'll provide you with a link to our box utility to download our PC edition software, as well as the Teledyne LaCroix scripts. Once you've done that, we'll provide you with a license for a full year, which is, coincides with your membership dates. And then you'll follow the simple instructions to get the installation to happen. We also do have a demo version, although this is limited. You'll have one test in each one of the groups of the actual, PC edition product. But it gives you a good idea of what kind of testing it offers. And you can see the other tests that are involved because they are just grayed out. And of course, you can follow along with them in the actual test plans themselves that are on the IOL website. If there were any issues that you found, you could obviously use our your IOL login in order to actually report any issues that you've seen. We actually would track them in our agile process using Jira. And of course, Bitbucket is our source control. We do provide release notes with each release so that once, if you were to submit an issue and we would tell you what that number is of the Jira in Jira, then you could obviously check out the release notes with each release to determine if that issue is fixed. Of course, you can always reach out to us too. And typically you could reach out to us. We ask if you're going to do that, you send mail to the NVMe lab at iol.unh.edu. And typically we have 2 major releases every year and then minor releases of the Interact software in between. And the major releases are tied to the test plans themselves. I think I'll go over that on this slide. As I said, there are 2 majors. They're coinciding with the NVMe.org's test plans that Dave just went over in detail. There are also minor releases in between that are roughly every 4 to 6 weeks. It depends on how many issues we have and the resources we have to work on them. Now, when we develop the Interact product, we are trying to use the latest and greatest agile process as well as the latest agile tools. We've got Jira, Bitbucket that I mentioned before. We are also, do scrums, we do sprints in order to get the development done. We have bug scrubs with review processes in them, so to make sure that, we try to catch as many issues as we can. But as Dave mentioned before, the whole reason why the tests are FYI is to vet out the problems in the test plans, as well as to vet out problems in our software, because a lot of times the software, we just don't have products yet that have these new, cutting edge features in them that are coming right out of the NVMe.org's, specifications. So we use all of these processes together to create a better product for you such that it becomes a stable product once it's gone through at least one iteration or one Plugfest. And we've worked on our test scripts along with working on them with your devices. Currently, we're shipping on Ubuntu 18.04 and kernel 5.5.10. We're also using Python version 3. We used to write all of our scripts in the Bash language, scripting language, but it was kind of cryptic and hard to read and hard to support. So we moved to Python. One of the issues you'll see there, it's not really an issue, but it's I guess we'll call it a new feature, is that, typically you used to see the Bash scripts in the LDD scripts directory. Of course, they were encrypted, but they they follow the exact test plans that are on the IOL website. But what you won't see now is the Python scripts. They are actually built into the image. So you wouldn't see an actual script number, say 1.1.1 in the Python directory. So that's kind of a new way of doing it. Makes it a lot tighter integration into the product, as well as makes the images a lot smaller. So the version 14 of Interact currently ships with the NVMe CLI 1.10.1 for PCI, excuse me, and also with 1.10.1.22 for fabrics. And this was an issue where we saw during our QA testing towards the end of our release, where we had to upgrade to the .22 release of NVMe CLI to deal with some PCI resource issues where we weren't able to show regs or anything across a fabric. Mainly it was seen on Rocky. We did not see it on TCP or Fiber Channel. So we needed to update there. We also had some other testing that we found. Persistent memory regions, register was definitely found to be an issue. We've submitted that to NVMe CLI's GitHub, and that's being worked on now. And one other issue that we've seen in the last week or two, we're getting some comments from the field, is that with kernels that are newer than 5.3, it looks like some of the async events are being dropped. And we did go back and test this with some kernels that were 5.3 and before, and it looks like the async issues work correctly. But for some reason, with the later ones, 5.4, 5.5, they're having some issues with async, and you'll get something like a command abort imported by the host with a 0x371, error. It affects about 3 tests, but just to let you know, those are kind of 3, areas that we see right now that we've been dealing with. And of course, the IOL Interact version 13 as well as 14 are all working towards the NVMe.org's NVMe 1.4 specification. Other, dependencies that Interact has is on Java, right? Our application is actually on Java as a GUI. So that would be the last dependency we have. This slide gives you an idea. It's kind of an eye chart, but everybody's seen it, I'm sure, before. If you've been on our webinars before, this is the set of systems where we actually do PCI interop testing on. This is the IO testing that we perform, either that or hot plug or boot testing also happening on these. Again, you can just reference this when we post this this slide deck up online. You'll be able to see these at a better granularity. So let's talk some shipping and logistics for the event. Please make sure your products get here earlier, because we'd like to start on the 9th and have everything. If we can set it up the Friday before, we could do that, make sure everything runs okay and is set up correctly. If you need any specific cabling, especially if we're talking fabrics, make sure we get those cables from you also. And also management cables. That was one of the issues we had 2 Plugfests ago, where we had a couple of vendors forget, cables to actually manage their products. And we were able to come up with both of them, but it was definitely a couple of hour process to find the correct cables. And then of course, details and configuration and things like that, as well as on the PCI side, if you've got any, a specific PCI extender card that you use, please let us have those too for this testing, and it'll make it go a lot smoother. If your system on the fabric side is such that, we ask you to have them all installed on a host system such that, most of the configuration's done. We can do basic configuration. If you've worked with us before, we're working with all the engineering students at UNH, and they're smart people who can, deal with networking and things like that, but they really don't understand your product in detail. So have it installed on a host system that is configured correctly. And simple networking things or issues, we can deal with those. We obviously are not going to do, since we're virtual this time, we're not going to do a large fabrics builds. It's too bad. I kind of enjoyed those. It's fun to see everybody's product hooked together in a large configuration and see what issues creep up. Pack all your equipment. Make sure there's a list there that references everything in there, just to make sure you get it all back after the testing's done. Or if you'd like to leave it here, that's great too, because it always helps us to increase our test bed and allows us to have a more varied, product base to test against our Interact software. And expect that the testing is going to take over a week. Of course, it depends upon how many products are registered for the event, but fabrics we've seen, at least from the last Plugfest 13, definitely took longer than a week or 2. So just be aware that it's going to take longer. Obviously, we can set up any kind of Zoom call or conference call or mails to deal with any issues of configuring or setting up devices. And of course, we can provide you with access to your devices through the internet. We can definitely blow a firewall hole through ours. We just need a public IP address on your side. So we asked that equipment comes here earlier because during the last 6 months of the pandemic, we've definitely seen some different, delivery techniques by the companies who usually do, our delivery of products. We want to make sure, we've seen a couple of customers have issues getting them through customs that has taken longer. So just be aware, make sure that you get them, give enough time for your shipping. We'll definitely publish a schedule after we get all the registrations closed. And I believe that's November 1st is when we're going to do that. And we're hoping to get out the reports by the Friday of December 4th. That would probably be the end date there of the whole event. And let's just go over a few more summary items. So as Dave mentioned, it is the NVMe.org's ICC, or Interop and Compliance Committee, hosted by Ryan Holmquist from Intel, that meets every other Tuesday. And you could go to the NVMe.org reflector to see the meeting times and dates for that. But this is the group that Dave was referencing that gets together to go over what are the new features or additions that will be made to the test plans that we test at each one of these Plugfests. So if you'd like to understand how that process works, or you'd like to have input into what gets into the test plans and things like that, I would highly recommend you get on these calls. I attend them every couple of weeks, and they're interesting because there's a, it definitely touches base with a lot of the issues that are happening within, the industry, and specifically maybe with your products. We'd also like to thank our test partners. Teledyne LaCroix, Viavi, Serial Tech, Sandblaze, and Quartz, all are essential to our testing. Each one of them offers a unique piece that helps us to provide a better test package for you, the customer, and allows you to also see how their products work and decide if it's something that you'd like for your particular in-house testing. But you're able to test with them here at the IOL, and each one of these are used to actually get you onto the integrators lists. So thank you very much, test partners. And here's the registration links. Now you'll notice that the OF and the PCI, NVMe PCI Plugfest links are both the same. That's because it's the same event happening on the same week. But I figured I'd put it up there twice, just for, for me, more than anything. Registration, like I said, would close for both of these events on the 1st of November. We'd ask that you would register 2 unique devices. If you have more than that, we'll probably put you on a wait list or let you know that it's obviously going to take longer. And again, this is a virtual event. We're sorry to say we cannot have attendees, at the event at this time. Hopefully by the next event in the spring, the next Plugfest, we'll be able to get everybody and see everybody again. But for this one, no attendees, sorry. So please send your equipment, please send your products, and we'll make good with them and get them tested out nicely and put onto the integrators list. So to be prepared, what do you need to do? Well, download the latest tools, become a member, download the latest tools, run them against your device. If you see any issues, let us know. Talk to us through NVMe Labs, or if you have any issues that you'd like to report as bugs, then you could report through your My IOL login. And what you have here is just a few more links that actually, when we release the software, we put them out on box for both the PC edition as well as Teledyne LaCroix, and also the licensing agreement, which once you become a member, you step that through, and that's what gets you those box links to download the software. So test your product with the conformance test tools, and then it'll make it a much smoother transition when you come here to the lab to get onto that integrators list. And just in summary, like I said, shipping is unique these days, although they've done a good job, I gotta say. They're definitely the front line. But make sure you give yourself enough time. The events will probably last longer than a week. We can definitely troubleshoot, and we'll deal with that as it comes up. We'd ask you that you limit the number of firmware updates, because that can obviously, anytime we have a new firmware update, we have to start testing all over again. And that just obviously takes time. And make sure, any kind of testing you can do beforehand will help us out. And if for some reason your product doesn't get onto the integrators list that week, and we're not able to do it due to, time constraints or schedule constraints, we can always work with you. Because if you've come to the Plugfest, more than likely you're a member of one of our OF groups, and you're able to test throughout the whole year by just scheduling a reservation in one of the groups. And we can definitely, once Plugfest 14 happens, we're able to then start testing with the Interact software version 14. We can't actually do that until the Plugfest. So at this point, we can't really test out any of the test and measurement companies' products. We usually do that at the Plugfest. We're sorry to say we can't do that because, again, of the virtualness, but we hopefully will get back there in the spring. And what we're hoping to do is have out, like I said, all reports out by the 4th, and then everything updated on the integrators list by Friday the 18th or even sooner. And I think we'll be able to do that sooner, because as soon as the reports go out, we'll know. And with that said, this is my contact information. So please, if you have any questions or anything like that, you can send them out to me or directly, or to Dave, or you could send one out to the NVMe lab at iol.unh.edu, and we can answer your questions there. And I think we're at that point in the program where we'd love to hear some questions, or if you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat or the QA section, and we'd love to answer them. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And we did have a question that came in, which I'll address in a second. Of course, if folks have questions, now's your chance to punch them there into the Q&A window there. Of course, we're going to post these slides and a recording of the webinar shortly. And usually, anything that comes in the Q&A, we'll try and add something into the slides to answer those for folks. So our question was actually on the fabrics front. So we had a question that asked, how many concurrent initiators would a target be required to support when we're doing the Interop test? Just 2 or more? And obviously that's an important question for someone who's trying to set up their product and get it ready for the event. So for the purpose of our required set of Interop tests, you only need to support 1 initiator at a time for the purpose of the conformance test and for the purpose of those required Interop tests. They're fairly straightforward, uncomplicated tests. In the past, when we were doing the large build for fabrics, we would try and have a device or a target support multiple concurrent initiators, and we were able to do kind of a lot of interesting configurations with that. That's something that's separate from the integrators list qualification. But so for the purpose of the just conformance tests and the required set of Interop tests for the integrators list, you only need to support 1 concurrent initiator. As Tim mentioned, this time we're not going to be doing the large build. That was, usually ended up being a very useful and very interesting debug session, right? So it's a very different set of tests than our conformance tests, which, folks are already downloading the tools and running them, very well established procedure. And same with our required set of Interop tests. They're a fairly straightforward thing for integrators list qualification. The large build was different, right? That was more of a big, debug session. Let's see, what do we have to do to break stuff kind of thing. I hope that we're able to get that back in the future. Obviously, it depends on a lot of things. The difficulty with doing the large build, of course, is that, because we're doing some unusual configurations and trying out some corner cases, setup and, even just managing the devices and running the devices can get complicated. So a lot of those times, we're not necessarily fighting NVMe issues or NVMe-OF issues, we're fighting kind of device configuration issues. And we still haven't gotten a great procedure down for enabling folks to do those kind of more in-depth device configurations fully remotely. So maybe that's something that we'll get to address again in the future. Because that large build, we learned a lot by doing that. It was good, I think, for the folks who participated. It was great for us at UNH and great for our students to be able to see that. And so hopefully we'll be able to get back to that in the future. I don't see any other questions coming through. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Oh,
Dave,
yeah.
I was going to say, can you just briefly discuss what's potentially coming in the spring? Like for the Plugfest?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So in the spring, for folks that have, been following NVMe, the kind of things coming down the pipe, zone namespaces. We've probably seen a lot of interest around zone namespaces. That's a completely different command set for NVMe products. That's something that's kind of being queued up. And so we're going to see if we can address that as well. So that'll be probably one of the big things coming in the spring. Yeah. So not yet, but we're expecting some more support for that next year. So, and of course, for folks that are interested in hearing more about that and having a little bit more input and insight into what's coming up for testing in 2021, of course, welcome to join the Interop and Compliance Committee calls. They're every other week in this time slot. So 2 o'clock Eastern US time, 11 a.m. Pacific time, every other Tuesday. So we dig into those a little bit more. So with that, I want to say thanks to everyone for signing on and listening in to hear the updates about what we've got planned for the Plugfest. It's going to be interesting. We're looking forward to working with you folks over the coming weeks as we prep for the Plugfest and actually do the testing and help qualify stuff for the integrators list. Always looking forward to that. Thanks everyone for your time. Thanks for your support of the lab and of course the support for NVMe organization as well. And of course, just like to say, hope everyone's able to stay safe and healthy out there for you and your families as well. So again, thanks for your time. If there's other questions, again, reach out to Tim or I directly, jump on the Interop or Compliance Committee call, email NVMe Lab, and we'll do our best to support you. So again, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day.